You know where you go to.
I do.
Oh, good.
Hopefully. I got my fingers crossed.
All right. Thanks, Jim.
All right, good morning, everybody. Thanks for having me back. For those that don't know me, my name is Chip LaPlante. I've been an instructor here in the region. This year will be 46 years. Flight instructors have to renew their certificates once every 2 years. That means I've done it 23 times now. Today I'm bringing you a presentation called the Chart Challenge. And the reason why I call it the Chart Challenge is because I'm going to challenge you to look at the VFR sectional in some different ways.
The magic number.
There we go. Ta-da. I think you can knock out that top row somehow.
It'll go in a minute,
Okay.
I think. Oh, maybe not. No, we're stuck with that.
So anyway, I'm gonna talk to you about the VFR sectional chart, mostly, but a few other things. But I call it the VFR Chart Challenge because I'm challenging you to look at the chart in a few different ways that we don't normally look at it, as you'll see as we move along. But first, I'd like to share with you a couple of flying stories. And one of them is way back when I was a freshly minted instrument pilot and didn't have too many IFR flights behind me. By making mistakes, it's funny how we learn by mistakes, right? Experience is the best schoolmaster. I took off on an IFR flight, and no sooner did I get into the clouds and on my way, I go to pull out the chart, and it's like, they're in my car. I'm heading down the airways, and my charts are in my car. My approach plates, everything's in my car. So I had there's the, before takeoff checklist, but I had also made an IFR checklist that I used so that all my radios were set up properly before the flight. And so after this little incident, I added to that IFR checklist at the bottom, appropriate navigation and letdown publications. That's story number one. Story number two is I was doing touch and goes with a student in a 150 at Anacortes in the morning, and we were on takeoff off of runway 18 in the climb out when we heard this huge explosion. And my student says to me, "What's that?" I said, "Oh, they're probably blowing up stumps up in the logging roads." And he goes, "On Sunday morning?" And at that time, the radio went ballistic with Mount St. Helens exploding. 44 years ago today, this date. And it was at 8:32, so that's what, about 45 minutes ago? So 44 years and 45 minutes ago. All right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Hey, I thought I had this perfected. What's the deal?
If we go like this.
Remedial training.
There we go.
Yeah. He didn't sign me up with it.
All right, well, we'll be talking about CFR sectional charts, digital chart supplements, and a few new ways to look at charts. And my notes here, for new pilots, the charts are a learning aid. And for experienced pilots, it's a quick reference guide. And now, go ahead, Dave. Just swipe left to right. There you go. Quick little chart fun fact. Years ago I thought, the airports have all letter identifiers, but some airports have numbers. And I've often wondered, what's the difference? Why is there all lettered airports and why is some airports numbers? Why aren't they all letters or all some numbers? But anyway, I looked into it and found out that for an airport to have an all-letter identifier, one of four things has to be in place. They can all be in place, or two of the four, one of the four, three of the four. But it has to have a control tower, or a navigate on the field, or scheduled service, or 24-hour customs on the field. Doesn't have any of these? It's a numbered airport, hence 38 Whiskey.
Strike three.
You're good.
Hit the, just put it up like this.
Okay.
Squeeze it back down a little bit. There you go.
Are you calling balls and strikes over there?
Where do charts come from? Well, you know, the FAA is the source of all data that's put onto these charts. And there's a website there if you want to, you can copy it down, but to get printed copies from chart providers, you can go to that website and you can get a list of providers that provide them. But I usually get mine from Amazon.com.
Are they cheaper than Amazon or?
So, yeah, they are.
Really?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And they come pretty quick, too, so.
One from BIS. But,
Amazon.com, yeah.
all right.
Yeah, if Amazon doesn't have it, you don't need it. All right?
Ready?
Yeah.
Go up. Swipe up. There you go. They've got it.
Let's go like this.
It's like an eye chart.
See that puppy there?
There we go. That's what we need.
Now, if you just swipe it.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay, the FAA says that you shall make yourself knowledgeable about all the information pertaining to your flight, right? Sectional charts give you a vast amount of that knowledge to do that. And are we required to have a sectional chart with us when we fly? No. You ever remember seeing a reg that says you gotta have a chart? No, it doesn't exist. Particularly light helicopter pilots, such as myself and Dave, you know, our 22s and 44s, all four limbs are constantly doing something unless you have an autopilot with a helicopter with a good autopilot. All four limbs are constantly doing something and you can't let go of them. To open up a chart and sit there and look at it for a while, you need to know before you go. And so therefore, we can't even pull up a chart in a helicopter unless we have a good autopilot.
You don't even need an airport.
Say again?
You don't even need an
Don't even need an airport. Right.
You guys fly like it too.
Would I fly without a chart? No, of course not. But here's the thing. If you have a paper chart in your airplane and it's out of date, get it out of there. If you ever get ramped by the FAA and they find you with an outdated chart, they're going to come down on you hard because, you know, the information on the charts changes rapidly. And so they're thinking you're using information that's obsolete, and that's going to get you in trouble with them, and they don't want that.
You're going to talk about this, then back up with the chart, even if it's outdated, if you have the fourth flight?
Well, if you're using the fourth flight, if you're using electronic charts, you're fine. Right? But still, if you've got an outdated one, they don't like to see out. You're better off getting rid of it. Just having your...
For example, your primary mean of chart is, let's say, fourth flight.
Sure, and you can tell them that.
Right, so therefore, if my fourth flight has a backup plan, let's say my fourth flight battery went down,
Right?
so I have charts, they may be outdated because I keep those as a backup reference.
Right, but if you're going to keep them as a backup reference, keep them current.
Okay, how's that?
So no chart is better than an old one.
Correct.
Keep them
What
current,
if
keep them
what if I designate my outdated chart as a sunshade?
What's that?
Sunshade.
Well, then write void on it across the whole thing. or not for, or what they put in the books, right? Not for use in navigation, right?
For reference it on the.
Okay. Okay. So what purpose do charts serve? Well, fundamentally, they assist us in the conduct of our flight, and they help our planning. Right? I'm sorry. Do you have a question?
Is there a place you can stand where you're not in the
Oh,
way?
sorry. Yeah.
You might be in their way.
Let me go over here.
You're in your own way.
I need to go over here so that I can do this, right?
That's right.
Wingardia Leviosa. And charts are symbolic representation of the things you need to accomplish this. And am I in your way now? Charts come out every 56 days. Next slide. The sectional chart has a scale of 1 inch equals approximately 500,000. And 1 inch equals approximately 8 statute miles. And that's kind of an interesting thing to know, that 1 inch, whenever you look at a chart, 1 inch is 8 miles. You know, if you took off, if Bellingham was reporting 8 miles visibility, you could take off from Linden. As soon as you got off and looked toward Bellingham, you wouldn't be able to see it. We're 10 miles from Bellingham, right? So it's a little bit more than an inch on the sectional chart. And, and a good rule of thumb I use for a lot of my flying is the 120 rule. 120 nautical miles an hour is 2 miles a minute. So if you're going 50 miles, you know it's going to take 25 minutes approximately, right? And if you've got a 182 or a 180 that's doing 130 nautical miles an hour or 145, it's going to take slightly less than that. But as a rule, 120 works great. Then you bump up to 180, that's 3 miles a minute, right? If you're going 90 miles, 60 minutes.
How about 60?
60 a mile a minute? That's good. Also, when do charts really become useful? The visibility of 8 miles and less, the more you need a chart. We can go out to Friday Harbor all day long at, you know, clearing 30 without a chart. But when it's 2002 and we're coming back, we need to use pilotage and make sure that island's that island as we wheeze our way, because we, you know, at 2 miles of visibility, we're going to be as far as we can see in 60 seconds at 120, right? And so the lower the visibility, the more we need that chart out on and looking at it and looking outside and looking, making sure we're at where we're supposed to be. Right? Go ahead. Navigation. Of course, the charts give us all kinds of information about navigation. But with a sectional chart, there's 3 basic types of navigation: pilotage, dead reckoning, and radio navigation. And we can do all 3 with a sectional chart. Of course, pilotage is looking at the chart, looking outside at landmarks. Oh yeah, I'm here, I'm going the way I'm supposed to be going. Deck reckoning is where we make a bunch of calculations to figure out how long it's going to take to get where we're going. And of course, do you remember a true course, plus or minus the wind, because winds aloft are always reported in true. Matter of fact, when you read winds, they're true. When you hear them over the radio, such as ATIS, AWASs, or ASOSs, they're magnetic. And then, of course, we apply the variation, the magnetic variation, to get our magnetic heading, and then, of course, our compass deviation to get our final compass heading, and that's technically what we're flying. But you know, with the advent of GPS and electronic heading indicators, this is all pretty much out the window. This is kind of old school stuff, right? But it's kind of a good idea to try to keep yourself aware of how to do it in case those electronic things go blank for some reason, right?
Question for you, Chip. Mm-hmm. What do you suppose the rationale is for having the aural winds reported in magnetic and the written winds being reported in true, when all pilots really give a dang about is magnetic?
That's true, but when you're doing the dead reckoning and you're applying the winds to your true course, the winds need to be true to do that. And that's the only reason. And I think that's why they do it. Remember the E6B? How many people remember how to manually work an E6B?
Do
Okay.
they still sell those?
I think, yeah, somewhere. I think there's
Yeah, antique shop somewhere.
somewhere. Okay. Let's see.
So, Chip, there's actually I read or watched an article on the web where they're actually thinking of getting rid of magnetic and just going all the way through, because everything, with the latest GPS and 4.5, you can ignore the magnetic side and just everyone work with truth. I mean, all the runways would never change direction, because as you know, as magnetic variation changes, eventually runways will be renamed.
Yes,
Whereas if they stayed and kept with true, every runway would always be the same.
That's right.
And then, so there's actually a lot of discussion going on in the higher ups,
Oh.
KO, to actually eliminate magnetic.
Well, you know, I agree with you wholeheartedly. It would be a lot better, as you'll see as we get into this, right? So, next slide.
Okay.
So, latitude and longitude, right? We all know the cardinal points of the compass true, right? Northeast, south, and west, 90, 180, 270, and 360. Everybody knows that, right? But can you tell me what the magnetic cardinal headings are in this region?
Minus 21 degrees, plus 20.
Everything we do in aviation is magnetic, right? Magnetic headings, the VORs are magnetic, the runways are magnetic, right? Everything's magnetic. And so instead of knowing these, everybody knows these. Next picture. The lines of latitude and longitude, right? These are true. 360, right? 90, 180, 270. That's called a quadrangle, and of course we know that in each quadrangle there's a maximum elevation figure, which we'll get into in a little bit. But those are true. Okay, next slide. These are section lines, and you can see the guide meridian here cutting up through. There you go. You can see the guide meridian coming up through the Weiser Lake and the Pole Road. And if you'll notice, there's all kinds of lines. I used to be a surveyor before I started flying for a living. And so that's really helped me a lot. North down the guide meridian, that's why they call it the guide meridian. That's true, 360 degrees, right? Going east down the Pole Road, that's true, 90 degrees. You're heading the way the Earth's rotating, right? And all of the property lines, roads, fences, ditches, they're all set up on these true cardinal points. So whenever I go flying and I look out at the ground, I see a compass rose everywhere. All right, next slide. In our area, the magnetic variation is 16 degrees to the east, which means the magnetic North Pole is 16 degrees to the east of true north. And that changes as you go east across the U.S. and right down through the center of the country. It's the agonic line where there is no variation. And of course, east of that line now, the magnetic north is to the west of true north. But if you apply this to the cardinal points, next slide, we have now the magnetic cardinal points of 344, 074, 164, and 254. And of course, I just round them out to remember them. You know, 70, 160, 250, 340. Now, when I look at those lines, I can line my airplane up with parallel to the guide and know that my compass should say 344. I don't need a compass rose or a runway or anything. All I got to do is turn so my wings are perpendicular and I'm parallel to the road, and my compass should say 344. And my heading should say 344. If I'm going east or west down the section, same thing, right? So whenever I go flying, I look out at the ground, I'm seeing a huge compass rose everywhere. If I want to fly 110 degrees, well, that's 40 degrees to the right of 70, which is east down the section lines. So it's halfway, almost halfway between south section lines and east. Runways, 16. Next slide. Hence, the ILS 164, parallel to the guide, parallel to the section lines. And from here to the middle of California, all runway 16s, because they round it to the nearest 10 degree, are parallel to the section lines. So I'm looking, if I see I'm going to an airport that has runway 16, I know it's got to be parallel to those lines when I'm looking for it. Going to Skagit, runway 11, halfway between the east section lines and the south section lines. 40 degrees, right? So it's almost halfway. So I'm looking for a runway that's angling halfway between the two section lines. Same way with Bremerton, runway 20, halfway between the south section lines and halfway from the west section lines. And so you can get an idea right away of how that runway sits in relation to those lines when you're looking for it. Also, I think it helps to alleviate runway takeoffs. If they clear me to taxi to runway 19, right, and I'm in this area, I know that's a runway that's 30 degrees south of the south section line. So I'm thinking, sitting there in my airplane, I know that's the south section line, so I'm looking for a runway that's 30 degrees to the right of that. And so that helps me out a lot, and I hope it does you. Remember the magnetic cardinal points of the compass, of the cardinal points of the compass, rather than the true cardinal points of the compass. All right, next slide. Oh, where are we at? Maximum elevation figures. Where are these puppies? They come in handy for when you're planning a cross-country flight. If I was going direct from, say, Bellingham to Manzanita, I can draw that line on my ForeFlight or on my paper chart, and I can look at those maximum elevation figures and find the biggest one that I'm going through and know that if I want to go up to an altitude and sit there the whole way, I got to be higher than that maximum elevation figure. The other place where it helps me is when I'm IFR and I'm on a designated route, and all of a sudden they start vectoring me, and vector me for any kind of time. East of Seattle, they're notorious for that, right? So I can look on my IFR chart, because these MEFs are on the IFR chart as well, and say, okay, if you're going to vector me this way, I can look at that MEF and go, yeah, okay, we're good. We're not going to have a CFIT here, right, which is controlled flight into terrain. But this is how they calculate it. They take the highest man-made obstacle, add a pucker factor of 100 feet, round it out to the nearest upper 100, and put up the maximum elevation figure for man-made obstacles. And it also includes natural, which is the next slide.
You ready?
Mm-hmm. And with the next slide, they put in 100 feet pucker factor plus 200 feet above the highest point. And so these maximum elevation figures, whether they're man-made or natural, you know that you've got at least 200 feet of clearance, and in most cases more, 300 or more.
So, if your barometer's set right.
If your barometer's set right, correct. Correct. And sometimes I'll check my altimeter, you know, if, like, for instance, you know, Lummi Island is 1,665 feet, it's printed on the chart, right? So I'll beam the top of Lummi with the very top of it on the horizon in the background and look at my altimeter. Oh yeah, okay, we're good. And same way with Mount Baker, I do that a lot with Mount Baker. Next slide. What's that mean, the star L? Who can tell me?
They got lights there.
They got lights there, but what's the star mean?
Pilot control.
Pilot control. A lot of people think that it's pilot controlled lighting, but it's not. All right. Chances are you can have some sort of control with the click of your mic button, but it doesn't mean that's the case. Next slide. Oh, look. It means you must consult the chart supplement, which used to be the airport facility directory, right? But you must consult the chart supplement because all kinds of different things can be happening. All right? For instance, Bellingham has a star L. I can tell you right now, the runway lights are on from dusk till dawn. So why the star L? That means you can change the intensity with the click of your button, and you can also change the intensity and the approach plate, or the approach lights, with the click of your button. But you wouldn't know that until you went into the chart supplement and looked at it. So it's important whenever you see the star L, if you've never been to the airport and you're not familiar with it, and you're going in there at night, check to see what type of lighting you got. Just don't think that the starred L means I can click my button and the lights come on for the full length of the runway and I'm good to go. There's all kinds of things that can be going on there, as you can see. Everybody read that okay? All right, next slide. Yeah. Here's another chart fun fact, okay? All VORs are set up magnetically north. Zero is pointing to magnetic north. So you can look straight up and then look at the zero and there's your variance without having looked for the variance line, magnetic variance line, right? Another thing is that all VOR roses are 10 nautical miles in diameter. or 11 statute. I mean, in radius. Diameter, it's 20 nautical miles, or 22 statute. And so there's a quick reference if you've got a VOR right on the airport. Oh, look, anywhere along this line, and hey, I'm 10 miles out. Bingo, I just know just by the compass rose, I'm 10 miles out. I don't have to measure anything or look at anything. I can just know when I get to the edge of this line, I'm 10 miles from the airport. Kind of an interesting way to do it, but so you've got an instant 20 nautical mile diameter that you can move anywhere on your chart, or a 10-mile radius. Okay, next chart. What do we got here? RCOs, remote communications outlets, okay? And they're everywhere, across the United States, or in the United States, I should say. There's over 2,100 RCOs. RCOs are, used by the flight service stations across America to talk to you. And generally there's one flight service station per state, but that's not always the case. But in Washington, we have Seattle has a flight service station, and they have hundreds of RCOs across the state. And with an RCO, you can literally do anything. Seattle radio, well, first of all, when you are using an RCO, and let's go to the next slide. There's an example at Bellingham of an RCO, 122.15. The guy in the flight service station has this board with all the RCOs that he's able to talk on. And there's a little light, and when you transmit, that light comes on. But if he's busy doing something, reading the paper, and he doesn't look up quick enough, because as soon as you're done transmitting, the light goes out. So he doesn't know what frequency to get back to you on, because there's all these RCOs across the whole state. So whenever you use an RCO, it's important to tell him what you're listening on. Seattle radio, 698 for Fox, on the ground at Bellingham, listening 122.15. Now he knows to flip that one up and talk to you. If he doesn't catch it and you don't tell him what you want to hear him on, he has one switch that turns them all on, and when he gets back to you, he's broadcasting over the entire state.
It's a good joke. I mean, he can do that.
Okay, but with an RCO, you can literally do anything. Open flight plans, closed flight plans, file flight plans. You can ask what time a tower closes, how long a runway is, any new NOTAMs at this particular airport, what's the weather at my destination, literally anything. They're there.
Runway lights?
What?
Will they turn on the runway lights?
They won't. They can tell you about the runway lights because they can go right to the sharp supplement and go, they got lights, but you got to do this, or you got to. I mean, you can ask them literally for any information that you want. I was up by Mount Baker one day when I called them and said I would like the winds aloft for Vancouver and Seattle at 9 and 12,000, so I could have a better idea of what I'm dealing with up there near the mountain. I'm sorry. And Tom, did you have a question?
I was just going to say, I actually used the Bellingham RCO for the first time about a month ago. I was taking my first trip over to Victoria, first time in Canada.
Yep.
On a VFR flight plan.
Right.
And I tried to open or activate the flight plan on ForeFlight, and I couldn't do it. So I called Bellingham or Seattle radio on Bellingham, and they activated the plan, gave me a 4-digit squawk code.
Yep.
Got in the air, called Victoria,
yep.
And everything was good.
Yep.
Yeah, it was easy.
Yeah. So these RCOs are all over the country, and if you need any kind of flight information, don't hesitate to call them. But be sure and tell them where you are and what frequency you want to hear them on. Right? Next slide. There's another one at East Sound, Mount Constitution, Seattle radio, listening Mount Constitution, 122.3. Next slide. I'm over by Wenatchee. I'm 30 miles east of Wenatchee, and I want to know what the weather's doing in Moses Lake. It's just past the hour, and I don't have the radio gear in my airplane to just punch it up and bring it up, right? But I want to know what the next METAR is, right? So I can say I'm 30 miles east of Wenatchee, listening Badger Mountain on 122.3. and requesting the latest Bozeman weather. And bingo, he gives me the whole spiel. Just like the days of the flight watch, by the way. Remember days of the flight watch? Well, that's all gone. So now it's just RCOs. There's over 2,100 of them across the country. The feds are going to decommission 631 of them in 2017. And since 2017, they decided that they were going to decommission 631 of them. And as of this date, only 5% of that has been decommissioned. So, all right, next slide. What's the dimensions of a Class Delta airspace? Anybody know? For those who haven't worked with me in the past, they don't get the answer.
5 miles from the point in the center, 10 miles total, side to side.
Okay, we know that the upper limit is 2,500 feet of the surface, shown by the brackets, the number in the brackets, that's the upper limit, right? But the lateral limit, next slide, is as depicted. Now, as a general rule, you can say approximately 5 miles, but it's truly as depicted, and it's predicated on the length of the runway. Okay, so here at Tacoma, you can see that from the center of the airport out to the edge of the Class Delta, it's 4 miles. But let's go to Moses Lake, where the runway's 13,900 feet long. Next slide. And look, it's 5.6 nautical miles from the center of the airport out to the edge of the Class Delta. A whole 1.6 miles further. And so it's important to remember that it's not just 5 miles. You need to look on your chart or your electronic gizmo to see the range, right? But it's as depicted. It's not a set number. Okay, next slide. What do you suppose is the biggest deviation in VFR flying? I'll give you a hint.
Airspace incursions.
Airspace. There are more deviations in VFR flying concerning airspace intrusions than any other deviation, right? And of course, we know Alpha, Bravo, Charlie, Delta, Echo, Golf in special use and yada, yada, yada. But I'm going to primarily talk about Echo and Golf, because that's pretty much what we fly mostly in. Although first off, the biggest difference between Bravo and Charlie, of course, we all know that with Bravo, you must hear the words cleared to operate within. Right? If you're doing Seattle, it's clear to operate within the Seattle class Bravo. You must hear those words. Whereas with Charlie, all they have to do is use your call sign. If I call Whidbey and say, hey, I'm over Eliza heading for Port Townsend, he says, 698 for Fox, Whidbey approach standby, I can penetrate his class Delta. But he says, aircraft calling Whidbey standby, I can't. So that's the biggest difference between those two. Echo airspace is everywhere, and taken away from that Echo airspace are class Charlies and Deltas, and that's pretty much it. And then, of course, Golf is generally anything below 700 feet to the surface or 1,200 feet to the surface, depending on the blue or red magenta, which you all probably know about. But all we need to fly in Gulf airspace legally, VFR, is a mile in clear clouds, right? And we're legally flying VFR. I wouldn't do it unless you're very familiar with the countryside and you have some outs, but you can legally do it, right? With Echo airspace, we got to have 3 miles visibility, right? And stay 500 above, or, 1,000 above, 2,000, 500 below, and 2,000 horizontally. Okay, next slide. What are basic VFR weather minimums? Now, this is an important thing to remember because it changes things. You know, when we fly in Echo airspace, that's considered controlled airspace. But what is it that's controlling us? Anybody know? The weather. That's what's controlling us. Okay, so what are basic VFR weather minimums? Anybody know? Can anybody tell me?
1,503.
Okay, next slide. 1,000-foot ceilings and or 3 miles visibility. Anytime the weather gets less than that, we are considered to be flying in IMC, or instrument meteorological conditions. Okay, we're flying IFR, essentially. And whenever the weather gets less than 1,003, things change for Class Delta and some Class Echo airports to the surface, right? When Bellingham is reporting weather less than this, and it doesn't mean it can be both or just one or the other, but when it goes less than that, we can't come and go VFR anymore. We need to get a special VFR clearance to leave the Delta or to come into the Delta. Okay, but in order to get a special, we've got to have at least 1 mile of reported visibility. Otherwise, we can't even get it, period. At night, we have to have an instrument-rated airplane. We have to be instrument-rated, and we got to be current to get a VFR special in or out of the Class Delta. Okay, so next slide. So here where it comes, this is where it comes into play. If you look at Port Angeles here, there's this red dashed line. There's no tower, but there's this red dashed line around the airport. And that means that Class Echo airspace goes to the surface, all the way to the surface, right? So in order to come and go from Port Angeles, we've got to have at least 3 miles of visibility. And ceiling's better than 1,000 feet. So we're 10 miles east, and we listen to the ASOS there, and it's saying it's 802. Well, if we go in there and land, we're breaking regs. All right? So we need to call and see if we can get a special. Why do you suppose they do this? Why do the feds do this in the first place? Well, that's to provide some sort of separation between IFR and VFR. You got an IFR on an instrument approach coming down through the clouds, right? And you don't want some VFR guys playing around in there, right? But there's a little dicey situation going on here. But anyway, we would use either would-be in the air. On the ground, you're not going to get would-be, I know from experience. But we can call the RCO, Seattle Radio. Listen, Port Angeles, 120, what is it?
122.6.
Thanks. 122.6 and requesting a special VFR clearance into Port Angeles to land. So he gets on the horn to ATC and says, I got a guy needing a special into Port Angeles. He goes, well, I got one on the ILS. He's going to have to wait. Because they'll only let one airplane at a time into that Class Echo airspace. To provide for that positive separation. Or if he's got nobody, yeah, let him go. Same way going out. You can call the RCO and say, I need a special to the east out of Port Angeles. And so he gets on ATC, yeah, let him go. Okay.
Excuse me for a second. Previous slide.
Go backwards.
1,000 or?
And or.
So if you're under 1,000, but you can see 3 miles, you're legal?
No.
Okay.
If it's 810, it's an IFR airport. You can't go in there without a special.
So the or shouldn't be in here.
Well, yes, it can, because you can have 10,001 and it's IFR. Or you can have 810 and it's still an IFR airport.
So you have to have both.
You don't have to have both. Either one makes it IFR. A ceiling of 810 it makes it an IFR airport.
Yeah,
But to make it
Oh, so yeah,
VFR,
you're saying below the weather, okay.
but to make it VFR, you need that.
You need that or better.
You need
better.
You need both.
1,000.
You need more than 1,000 and more than 3 or more for you to be able to come and go without having to talk to anybody.
So you gotta decide which question you're answering.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
can have and or in there.
Okay. Well, maybe yeah, it's a little confusing. But the bottom line is that you gotta either one will make it an IFR airport, and you got to have better than both in order for it to be a VFR airport. Okay, next slide. The next slide. Oh, looky here. We got Arlington, right? And you know what? There's an instrument approach to Arlington. Here's the scary thing, is the instrument approach, the minimum descent altitude for that approach, puts that airplane into Gulf airspace. There's no separation between VFR and IFR. If it's 802 at Arlington, I could be doing my ultralight touch and goes on 3-4, going downwind at 600 or 700 feet with just a mile of visibility, and I'm legally doing touch and goes at Arlington. Here's this guy coming down through the clouds on the RNAV or the localizer 3-4 approach. That allows that airplane to come well down into Gulf. When he breaks out, he could have a guy right in front of him. Okay, so here's the difference. Go back to the previous slide. You notice here at Port Angeles, it has an ASOS. Go to the next slide. At Arlington, it's an AWAS. What's the difference? And that's the reason, okay? And ASOS, let me check my notes here. Of course, they both provide the same stuff, the wind speed, the cloud conditions, the altimeter setting, yada, yada. But the ASOS is newer. It's owned by the FAA, it's installed by the FAA, and it's calibrated by the FAA. The AWAS is federally installed, but it's not owned by the FAA. It's owned by municipalities or businesses and calibrated and maintained by municipalities or businesses. So therefore, the FAA considers AWAS not an approved weather reporting facility. And that's the reason why there's no echo to the surface. Okay, so when I see that I'm listening to an AWAS, that W makes me think, warning, warning, warning. There could be something going on here between IFR and VFR. There could be some confliction, right? Especially if the weather is low. So, AWAS, most of the airports across the United States are AWAS 3, and AWASs have a whole plethora of them. AWAS 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And they provide different things, but most of them are 3, which provide pretty much everything. All right.
Next one.
Yep, next one. Okay, what's this mean?
Parachutes.
For crazy people jumping out of perfect good airplane.
There's crazy people here.
That means you better watch out for, next slide, me. I might be flying without the airplane. All right. Over the years, there's one thing that I enjoy more than flying, and that's teaching it. And so thank you for the opportunity to do what I enjoy the most. Next slide. Now Dave has an update on his helicycle.
Except you gotta tell me how to get out of this. This is a new iPad, and it's got different haptics in mine. Oh, there you go.
Can you sign us off on the ground portion of our flight review?
I can.
Albums.
I think these are, if you go back to the pictures.
No, I want to go to albums.
Okay.
Because we put it in here as an
Right.
album. There we
Okay,
go.
there you go. Okay.
Okay, since everybody always asks, here's the latest.
Display now?
Yeah, it's pretty much a static display. Let's see.
It's a law and order one?
Anyway, this one is running. Hasn't flown yet. I'm waiting for the IA who will be going over everything with me. He is on vacation right now. He gets back a week from today. And then we should have that one flying, and there should be no reason why it won't be here, Bill, for the wingding you got coming up.
That was not yours, right?
That's mine. That's one of 2.
I thought yours was the turbine.
No, we have 2 projects.
Oh, okay.
This project kind of came along and took priority. What I'm working on right now is the last details, tracking and balancing. This is the optical tachometer. It's got a little piece of reflective tape that goes on one of the blades that hooks up to this. You see the tape, the duct tape, the wire. That's actually the approved way to run the wires around to get to from the sensors to the computer. And there's the little computer, and you can see the IPS, which is inches per second. That's referring to the distance that the center of mass of the main rotor system is off from the actual center of the main rotor shaft. The standard, the limit established by Robinson in this case is 0.2 IPS, and Chip and I and some other friends and relatives of mine got together and put the blades on, and when Chip and I put the hub on, we were very careful, done a lot of calculations to get the shimming just right. I had the hub within 8/10,000ths of an inch of being exactly on the center of the shaft, and you can see that the IPS here is 0.04 and the limit is 0.2. So it's in real good shape. Oh, there we go. It makes helicopter noises.
Is this the one I took?
Yeah, that's one of the ones you took. And the last step that I'm working on, I was going to do it this afternoon, but with it raining, it probably won't happen. I've tracked the tail rotor blades, and this looks like sort of a crazy way to do it, but it's actually how you do it. You make a little bracket that you attach to the tail cone, and then you, without touching the blades, you rotate the rotor system around, and you mark on the, where's your pointer, Chip? How many more?
It's still on the thingy there somewhere. Right there.
Is this it?
Yep.
This is a pin.
The hell happened to that?
It got away. Yeah, anyway, I'll point to it here.
Oh, here it is.
Yeah, there you go. Okay. So this little weep hole here, the maintenance manual tells you to run the rotor system around and mark where each blade. You mark one blade is blue and one is red. Mark where the little hole, weep hole, comes across this gauge you've made. And when I initially checked it, the blue blade was here and the red blade was here, about a ½ inch. That is out of spec. And so I adjusted the teetering of the blade and got it down to blue blade is now here, red blade is here. That's within spec. That's the way it's supposed to be. So that's the tracking of the blade. So that blade has been tracked. I now have to switch that sensor over to the IPS sensor. There's an accelerometer and the tachometer over to dynamically balance those blades, and then it's done. So that's that project. And that's the system that you use to do the dynamic balancing. Very slick setup. One person can do the tracking and balancing with this, where before it was a complicated process where you had to have, years ago, where they would have somebody standing out with a stick with something on the end, and when the blades touched a little flag that they had on there, that was how the tracking was determined. Sounds terribly dangerous to me. What's that?
I've done it.
Yeah, sounds cuckoo to me.
They used a crayon.
A crayon, yeah. This uses a camera that, let's see, I think maybe I do have a picture of that camera. Let's see. Yeah, well, in the video here, you can see me with my hand, right hand. I'm adjusting the camera while I'm looking at the computer, and the camera is looking at the blade, and the computer knows the specs on R22 blades or the Bell 212 blades or whatever you've punched in the aircraft type is, and so it knows how long the blade is, what the chord is, and with the timing signal coming from the tachometer, it's able to determine when the non-master blade is coming by, and then it compares what it sees in terms of the tip location from one blade to the other, and tells you how far it's off. It's really quite amazing. And the pilot has a little switch that you temporarily attach to the collective, and you can capture data at any time. So you don't have to have somebody on the ground, you can just press the button and the computer captures the data. Very slick. Expensive though, that's about an $8,000 piece of gear. Now, as to my other project, everything aft of the instrument pod is now completely finished, and here I'm just putting the final touches on the shelf, which is underneath the seat, and you can see these two bundles of wires here. Okay, so everything aft of here is completely finished, and these 2 bundles are now waiting for me to finish with the Robinson so that I can run them up and connect them to the avionics that are in the instrument pod and the instrument panel, and that one is at long last finally done. So that's the update on my projects. There you go, all yours.
Got room on the instrument panel for the blood pressure gauge?
Thank you, Dave.
Yeah.
Thanks, Chip. Yes.
I've got one thing
Yes.
about a little incident with the chip and I. This has been a long time ago, I don't remember how many years, but I used to have a small biplane. Originally it had a 2-cylinder Volkswagen engine, and later I put a 4-cylinder in and had to get licensed as sport plane. But anyway, I can't remember what, but I was coming in here with it going downwind and then crosswind, or come in from the west, crosswind and downwind. And unknown to me, Chip was out there coming down in his parachute.
Sorry.
We didn't have any, I don't remember, I never saw him until he was on the ground. So I
Right,
don't know.
and we didn't have any real confliction either.
No. But he said after he was on the ground, he says, "Did you know that you had a flock of geese following you?" He said those geese came from the west with me, turned crossways. When I turned downwind, they peeled off and landed in the golf course.
You know, I don't know what it is about birds, but I've seen this happen a lot. And I think it's that they enjoy getting into the wake turbulence. You know, like at Final and 3-4 at Bellingham, the seagulls were out there playing in the wake turbulence.
Wind in air is Mother Goose on Final.
First jump I made over Oak Harbor when they opened that drop zone, the owner and myself, we opened up fairly high, 3,500 feet or so, and an eagle came right up beside me from here to the clock on the wall, flying right beside me, and he had to go slow, and I could see the ruffling of his feathers over the upper surface of the wing. I could see the yellow in his eyes looking at me, and it was obvious he was looking at me and he was saying, "You're not food." Yeah, and then he said, "Watch this." He takes a dive and peels up, does a wing over, and goes over to my buddy and forms up on him. I was so wishing I'd had a GoPro or something.
Wow.
And when Paul was still around with us, we went flying one day in his robe, and we were out over the field out here. And he said, "You want to fly for a bit?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, I'll take the stick." And I'm flying a little bit. And I said, "Oh, what Paul is an eagle? Give me that stick, I'll have to fly with eagles."
Fight on, fight on.
I have a question. This is more drawing upon area knowledge. I'm somewhat new to flying in the area, probably within the last 5 years or so, and I'm learning a lot of the local area culture. One of the things I've noticed last few weeks I've been flying is parasailing. Now I know off of Oyster Dome you get a fair amount of parasailing, especially on the weekends, but I see it on the weekdays too. So south of Chuckanut Bay there. But I have noticed it now. I've spotted some guys just below the cloud base. The cloud base is about 5,500 to 6,000, just south of Acme Airport, the next valley over east of Lake Whatcom. Is that a club, or is this something that's been going on? Everybody knows about it. I just started noticing guys flying around in parachutes over in that area as I'm cruising around.
Yep.
And
paragliding I don't think there may be a club or an association, I'm not sure, but it's a pretty common sport in this area because of the uplifting you can get from the terrain, and so you'll see these guys with hang gliders and parasails in a lot of different places. Silver Lake is another,
Silver Lake, yeah, they got
another big one.
Okay.
The county actually supports that with a landing strip within the park.
Right.
They go up on, is it Black Mountain? I can't remember.
Right,
Black Mountain, I think.
yeah. I've taken a hang glider off of Black Mountain.
Okay, maybe that's
and
what I'm
landed
seeing.
in
And I was
Silver Lake.
unaware of that, and I didn't know that if that was depicted on charts.
They fly over Butler Field quite a bit too. I mean, right up in the mountain there.
Yeah.
They
Okay.
ride the ridge there.
It's a 4,000 foot drop, so even if it's a sled run, you get a good ride.
Okay. Okay. Wow.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
Keep your eyes peeled.
I didn't see one flying right there, but.
But South Chuckanut is a prominent place to see
Yeah,
them.
Right.
Is it Blanchard?
Blanchard Mountain, yeah.
And Black Mountain here.
Black Mountain here.
And they land within Silver Lake Park.
Yeah. The Acme one's new to me. I haven't heard of that one yet. So.
Okay, anything else good for the game or?
For the soaring enthusiasts, there's a whole stack of soaring magazines over here with Ken right now.
Okay. Help yourself. Yes, Tom.
Also, prior to the start of the meeting today, we had a gentleman come by who's no longer in flying, but he had a tremendous collection of books and things. And I know Ruben's going to be going through those, but if you guys have any interest, over in the corner there's a stack. We'll end up taking those and putting them in the bookcase. If you want to borrow them, take them, read them, anytime you can just grab them. They're here as a resource for everybody. So.
Is that the guy that left just before we started?
Yeah, the gentleman in the red SUV.
Yep. Oh. Okay, nothing else, then feel free to hang around, chat, and we'll see you in 4 weeks.
Very good.
And there's a lot of food left. Take a